Would you dare to keep a promise even if your heart has moved on? I stood under the northern lights in Denmark, asking myself this very question. Today's video will take you through my true story, from failures and frustration in slow English listening, reading, and speaking, to the small but powerful steps that pushed me forward. Watch to discover how one small action can change your entire journey. The journey begins. Denmark greeted me with the icy breath of the northern wind and streets buried under snow. Everything was so quiet that you could hear your own heartbeat while walking on the cobblestone roads of Copenhagen. I came here not just for work, but to keep a promise I once thought I had forgotten. Ironically, it was this faraway place that forced me to face it more clearly than ever. When you live in a country where daylight lasts only a few hours, everything seems to slow down, including you. I began spending more time with myself, confronting what I had always avoided, practicing English listening, reading, and speaking. Sounds simple, but to me back then it was a battle. I could understand individual words, but when they flowed together in a sentence, my mind froze. I felt stupid, behind, and even questioned whether I was smart enough to learn this language. One morning, I was sitting in a small cafe overlooking the square. A Danish person smiled and greeted me in English, so naturally, so effortlessly, that I felt embarrassed by my awkward reaction. But instead of avoiding his gaze, I smiled back. In that moment, I realized something. No one truly cares if you speak perfectly. The only thing holding you back is the fear inside your head. Your brain doesn't hate learning English. It just hates the feeling of failure. Every time you hesitate and stay silent, you're teaching it that silence is safer. But that's also the moment you lose your chance. I realized this when I caught myself afraid to speak in a Danish cafe. From then on, I started a new habit. Say one sentence every day, wrong, short, funny, it didn't matter as long as I spoke. Maybe you're somewhere on the same path, afraid, tired, and ready to give up. But remember, every lighthouse begins as a single spark in the dark. And sometimes that spark comes from the very embarrassment you're trying to hide. The old promise. Some promises seem to have been swept away by the wind, but in truth, they're just resting somewhere inside your heart, waiting for a snowy night to be remembered again. I once promised someone that I would speak English like a native. It sounded bold, maybe even a little arrogant, but back then I believed in it. Then time passed, work took over, and that promise faded like breath on a frosted window. Until one night in Aarhus, sitting in my small rented room, I listened to an old voice recording of myself. My voice stuttered, my rhythm was stiff, and my pronunciation was so wrong it was almost funny. I laughed at first, then fell silent. The laughter died, and I felt something twist inside. Not shame, but regret. I had promised myself not to give up, yet somehow I had become the one who broke that promise. Here's something fascinating about your brain. When you break a promise to someone else, it hurts a little. But when you break one to yourself, it leaves a deep scar. Your brain stores it as an emotional scratch, making you hesitant to start again because it's afraid of feeling disappointed once more. That's why so many people struggle to improve their English. It's not because they lack skill, but because they've stopped trusting themselves. That night, I rewrote my promise on a piece of paper and taped it to the wall. Speak English like it's part of your soul. I didn't know if I could really do it, but one thing was certain. I would no longer let this promise gather dust in the dark. If you're watching this, maybe you too are carrying a promise inside. Maybe to learn English, to study abroad, to speak with confidence, or simply not to give up. No matter how old that promise is, it can come alive again, if you dare to listen to it once more. Because sometimes the oldest promises are the quiet embers, waiting for you to breathe life into them on a cold winter night. My first day in Copenhagen. Copenhagen is a place where everything seems to run perfectly, from the trains to the morning coffee. But for me, my first day there felt like a joke. I stood in the middle of the station, staring at the digital board filled with Danish words I couldn't understand. Everyone around me spoke fluent English, and there I was trying to piece together words in my head as if I were solving a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I remember the moment a young woman gently asked, "Do you need help?" And I froze. I understood the question, but my brain responded so slowly that she had to repeat it. When I finally stammered, "Yes, I think so, maybe?" She laughed, not to mock me, but out of kindness, the kind of laughter that makes you feel seen. That's when I realized, speaking English isn't just about language, it's about connection. That evening I wandered around Nyhavn, the colorful harbor street glowing under golden lights. People talked, laughed, sang, and I just stood there watching. At one point it hit me. If I keep being afraid of mistakes, I'll never truly belong here. So I whispered to myself almost shyly, "Hi, I'm new here." A British couple heard me, turned around, smiled, and started a conversation. We talked about the weather, coffee, and even snow. That short chat made me feel alive again. Many people think learning English means sitting in a room and listening to audio lessons for hours. But the truth is, a language only lives when you use it. Your brain learns best when emotions are involved. Fear, joy, awkwardness, embarrassment. They're all fuel for memory. And that night, under Copenhagen's warm streetlights, I rebooted my language brain with one simple sentence. "Hi, I'm new here." Since then, every day has been a small lesson, not just in English, but in the courage to speak up, even if it's clumsy and uncertain. Doubt and disappointment. There's a strange moment in every learner's journey when progress feels invisible. You study, you listen, you repeat, and yet nothing seems to stick. That moment came to me one gray morning in Denmark, when even the sky looked tired. I had spent weeks practicing English slowly, listening, reading aloud, shadowing native speakers, but my tongue still stumbled, my brain still hesitated. It felt like walking on a treadmill, moving endlessly, going nowhere. One day, during a meeting at work, I tried to explain an idea in English. The words got tangled. My colleague waited politely, but my confidence collapsed faster than my grammar. Afterward, I went home, stared at the mirror, and said out loud, "Maybe I'll never sound natural." The reflection didn't argue, it just looked back, exhausted. Here's the thing. Your brain hates uncertainty more than it hates hard work. It would rather you quit than face endless imperfection. Scientists call this cognitive fatigue, when the brain's reward system shuts down because it can't see progress. It's the reason we binge-watch shows instead of practicing pronunciation, or scroll endlessly instead of repeating new words. It's not laziness. It's protection. Your brain is trying to save you from the pain of failing again. That night, I almost deleted my English practice files. But before I did, I remembered the Northern Lights forecast. A rare display expected that evening. I grabbed my jacket and walked out into the cold. The sky slowly lit up in waves of green and purple. It was silent but not empty. And standing there, I realized something simple yet powerful. Maybe the lights don't appear every night, but they do appear, if you're patient enough to wait. Maybe language is the same. You don't see progress every day, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. Every awkward sentence, every failed attempt, every moment you almost give up. It's all part of the quiet building beneath the surface. The next morning I didn't quit. I spoke again. Still slow, still clumsy, but real. And that was enough. The Northern Lights moment. The night the Northern Lights finally appeared, it didn't feel real at first. The sky above Denmark was alive. Shifting green ribbons floating like breath across the stars. People around me whispered, gasped, lifted their phones. But I didn't move. I just stood there, frozen in awe and strangely emotional, as if the sky itself was reminding me of the promise I'd made long ago. There's something about the Northern Lights. They appear without warning, only when the conditions are just right. You can't force them, can't predict them, can't schedule them. You simply show up and wait. And as I stood there, I realized that learning English or any language really is exactly the same. You can't demand fluency. You have to be there for it, again and again, through all the silent nights when nothing seems to shine. The cold bit into my hands, but I felt a strange warmth inside. My brain, which had spent months fighting itself, suddenly quieted. Maybe it wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about presence. Just like the lights, progress happens quietly, beautifully. When you least expect it, a thought crossed my mind. Every time I'd hesitated to speak, it was as if I'd turned my back to the sky, missing a miracle that was happening right above me. And maybe every small sentence I dared to say was my way of looking up again. I whispered to myself, I'm still here. And somehow that felt like keeping my promise. Psychologists say moments of awe reset the brain. They shrink your ego, open your perception, and make your challenges feel smaller. That night I understood. My fear of failure wasn't gone, but it no longer owned me. It was just noise. Under the dancing auroras, I made a new vow, not to be perfect, not even to sound fluent, but simply to keep showing up. Because sometimes the most powerful way to honor a promise is just to stay when it's easier to leave. When words finally flowed, weeks passed after that night, and something inside me began to shift quietly. I no longer studied English as if I were fighting a war. I started listening with curiosity, not fear. Each word became less of a test and more of a window into someone's thoughts, someone's life. One evening, I was invited to a small gathering. Everyone spoke English. Not perfectly, but with heart. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled a little, as they always did. But this time I didn't freeze. I simply spoke. Slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. And then something unexpected happened. They listened. They laughed at my joke. They nodded as I shared my story. For the first time, I realized communication isn't about sounding native. It's about being understood, about connecting. That night, I walked home under the same dim Danish streetlights, but the world felt different, lighter. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed silent, afraid of mistakes. Now I knew those mistakes were just bridges waiting to be crossed. When you finally stop fearing how you sound, your real voice begins to appear. And maybe that's what fluency truly means. Not speaking like someone else, but speaking like yourself, clearly, confidently, without apology. I once thought English was something I had to conquer. But now I see it was never the enemy. It was the mirror. It reflected my fear, my patience, my resilience, and finally my growth. Learning English didn't just change my accent. It changed the way I see courage. Because sometimes courage isn't loud or heroic. It's quiet. It's the voice that says, "I'll try again tomorrow." And maybe that's the whole point of this journey. The promise I kept. Months later, as spring slowly melted the last traces of Danish snow, I realized the promise I'd made wasn't about language at all. It was about showing up for myself. Every single day, no matter how small the progress point. One morning, I opened my old notebook, the one filled with messy vocabulary lists and crossed-out sentences. I smiled. Every line was proof that I hadn't given up. Each word carried a piece of my stubbornness, my patience, my growth. Then I remembered why I came here in the first place. It wasn't just to work or to travel. It was to keep a promise to the version of me who once believed she wasn't enough. That scared, quiet version of myself who sat in a cafe, afraid to speak. I wanted to show her that it's okay to stumble, to be imperfect, to start over again and again. That day I recorded a short video of myself speaking English, not perfectly but proudly. I posted it online not for likes, but as a message to whoever might be where I once was. You don't need perfect grammar to be brave. You just need one small step today. And as the video uploaded, I felt something settle inside me. A calm I hadn't known before. I finally understood. The promise wasn't about mastering English. It was about not running away from myself, because when you stop waiting to be ready, you begin to live. And maybe that's what all learning is about, not chasing perfection but discovering who you become along the way. So if you're listening to this and you feel stuck, tired, or behind, remember this: your pace doesn't matter. Your effort does. Keep showing up, keep speaking, keep trying. Because one day you'll look back and realize you didn't just learn English, you learned yourself. Wrapping up the journey. Here we are, at the end of this story under the northern lights. What began as a promise to speak English confidently became so much more. It turned into a journey of patience, self-compassion, and courage. From freezing mornings in Copenhagen to quiet evenings in Aarhus, every mispronounced word, every awkward conversation, every hesitant sentence added up. They weren't failures, they were stepping stones. Learning a language slowly, clearly, and deliberately isn't about speed. It's about connection. Connecting with yourself, with others, and with the experiences that make you human. And when you approach English or any skill with curiosity instead of fear, the growth happens naturally, quietly, beautifully. So what's the takeaway? Don't measure yourself by perfection. Measure yourself by persistence. Keep speaking, keep listening, keep reading, even when it feels small or silly. Your brain will adapt, your confidence will grow, and little by little, your words will flow as naturally as the northern lights dance across the sky. Remember the promise you made to yourself. Even if it's old, even if you thought it was broken, it can always be renewed. Because the act of showing up day after day is itself a promise kept. And for you watching this video, let it be a reminder. Every small step matters. Every attempt counts. Every "I'll try again tomorrow" is a victory.